On this Friday night, 4 days after the van massacre on a Toronto street, police named the dead. What we know now about the 10 people whose lives were cut short, how local community centers become a place of grief and solace, and the details of new charges soon to be laid.
Also tonight, why did the TSX shut down early for the first time in almost a decade?
And after the historic face-to-face of North and South in the Korean DMZ, how that summit might fit into Donald Trump's grand plan for the peninsula. And we ask, is the world's cautious optimism too optimistic? This is The National.
Two important updates today from Toronto Police on the mass murder that has shaken this city. The suspect will soon be charged with 2 additional counts of attempted murder. And for the first time, officials have named the 10 people killed in the van attack. Here's Joanna Remiliotis with that sobering moment.
It was the final formality.
Victim number 1, Ji-hun Kim, 22 years, of Toronto. Victim number 2, So-hee Chung, 22 years, of Toronto.
One after another, police named all 10 victims of Monday's van attack.
Victim number 3, Geraldine Brady, 83 years, from Toronto. Chol Min Kang, 45 years, Toronto.
The grim list marks the end of an agonizing week.
Anne-Marie D'Amico, 30 years, from Toronto. Betty Forsyth, 94 years, Toronto. Munir Nadjer, 85 years, of Toronto. Dorothy Sewell, 80 years, Toronto. Andrea Braddon, 33 years, from Woodbridge. Boitis Renuka Amarasinga, 45 years, Toronto.
Everybody has suffered a terrible tragedy.
For police, it has been a difficult balance because of the scale of the crime scene, the number of people injured and killed. It's taken days for families to get the cold confirmation.
Because of the fact that there's a potential for confusion, given the traumatic injuries, the number of people that are alive and the number of people that are deceased, and the trauma of the whole event. So we are very cautious and careful and methodical.
Some of the victims' names emerged over the last few days. Today, new ones, and some new faces. Andrea Braddon, 33 years old. 83-year-old Geraldine Brady. Ji-hun Kim and So-hee Chung, both 22. A Chung family member who didn't want to be identified issued this statement. She was a beautiful person and well-liked by her friends. She had big dreams of doing something for society and was studying sciences at U of T. She was a very nice person. With every name, the horror of what happened becomes more heartbreaking. At another memorial, a few blocks away, where the carnage ended, another procession.
I don't know these people, but it hurts me.
Why am I crying? I cried when it happened, and then I stopped. And then I saw all these pictures. When you're here, it really tears your heart.
The randomness of the attack has left a shared sorrow, knowing it could have been anyone. But the family's grief is still so private. At Toronto's Korean Community Association, volunteers run an ad hoc crisis center and prepare for a vigil. 3 of the injured and 3 of the dead are of Korean descent. Going to the airport to greet their families was an act of condolence for Danielle Lee.
I saw a family that had a child in the hospital where they were happy that they were alive, that they didn't have to go through the pain. And you had another side of family where, they know the fact that the child is no longer with them. And it's just, I cannot describe it, the pain that they're going through. Like I said, it's just heartbreaking.
Those families have been told this is for them, a gathering to honor their loved ones and to support them as they struggle to stand the grief.
And Joanna joins us now. This case so emotional for everyone connected to it, including investigators for whom it all got a little bit bigger today.
They announced additional charges today, Ian, and that's related to 2 other people who got struck by the van that police didn't know about until later because they weren't at the scene when they arrived and they didn't need hospitalization. So that puts the charges count now. Alec Manassian faces 10 charges of first-degree murder and 16 charges of attempted murder. And they also announced today that 12 people are still in hospital and still in critical condition.
This was, as we know, a big crime scene, long stretch of road, lots of witnesses, and police have been asking people to come forward.
They have, and people have come forward. They've already interviewed 170 witnesses, and they plan to interview another 100. They've also said that they've received more than 100 images, and they're also still gathering surveillance video from all the businesses that line that busy stretch of Yonge. And that's all to reconstruct as accurately as possible an attack that lasted 7 minutes.
All right, Joanna, thank you.
You're welcome.
From the beginning, many people have wondered whether police considered this an act of terrorism. Reporters today asking whether the involvement of the RCMP is a sign that police are pursuing that theory.
Certainly the evidence that we have in this investigation does not meet the threshold for Section 83 of the Criminal Code. Terrorism, there's a whole bunch of specifics with respect to the terrorism section that relate to religion, ideologies, and stuff like that, and we haven't met that threshold.
Police say they have not determined the motive. There has, of course, been much speculation about the suspect's apparent support of an online community which denigrates women. And this Sunday, community organizers are expecting 25,000 people to be at a vigil near the site of the attack. We'll bring you that live starting at 7 p.m. Eastern on CBC News Network.
What started with a simple handshake has ended with a much bigger takeaway. The leaders of North and South Korea wrapped their historic summit today with the promise, in writing, the world was hoping for: complete denuclearization. But as Sasha Petrosic shows us, it was a day and a deal, long on hope, but short on detail.
It was a day full of unforgettable and even unpredictable moments, many of them designed with the cameras in mind. From the first handshake across the border, the first step by North Korea's Kim Jong-un into the South, to the unscripted scene where Kim pulled South Korea's Moon Jae-in briefly to the north. Who would have thought the North Korean dictator could seem so charming? Much of the summit was deeply symbolic, a traditional Korean honor guard, traditional music and food, even soil from the north and south mixed together to plant a tree that dates back to the start of the Korean War, 68 years ago. That was followed by a walk in the woods and a long private chat by the 2 leaders. It was all very friendly and peaceful, right down to the arms raised in victory. Exactly the message later delivered in the summit communique by President Moon. There will be no more war on the Korean peninsula, he says. A new age of peace has begun. The document, signed by both leaders, calls for a formal end to the Korean War and the complete denuclearization of the peninsula through negotiations with the U.S. Kim says he laments the fact that promises in previous agreements were never kept. But this communique doesn't lay out a method or timetable for denuclearization either. That's a concern, says a former U.S. ambassador to South Korea.
A lot of good intentions there, ambitious intentions, if you will, but a lot of work still to be done.
But on the streets of Seoul tonight, there is a new sense of hope. Not long ago, Kim Jong-un was threatening us with nuclear weapons, says Cho Dayo. Now I think things are really changing.
So let's talk with Sasha, joining us now from Seoul, where it's already Saturday morning. And Sasha, as you say, there is hope, clearly, but how believable is this sudden outbreak of warmth and reason?
Well, that's a very good question, Andrew. You know, on the streets of Seoul here in South Korea, there's always been a lot of skepticism about Kim Jong-un. They don't trust him to keep his promises, just like they didn't trust his father or grandfather when they were in power. I'll give you an example. Both leaders agreed to this complete denuclearization in writing at this summit. But Kim Jong-un never actually used those words. In fact, he's never said that publicly, and he certainly never said that he is willing to give up all his nuclear missiles.
Right, and Sasha, you look at all that's transpired. I mean, a 12-hour summit, an unprecedented look at the North Korean leader, and a very different picture than we're used to.
That man, it really is an enigma, and as much of an enigma as his country is, really. You know, South Korean intelligence services and the Americans have been looking a lot at him. He can be extremely charming, but at the same time, he can be scheming, crafty, and very, very smart. And we may well have seen both sides of that character to an unprecedented extent during this summit.
Sasha Petrusik in Seoul, thanks very much. So the two Korean leaders made nice on many issues, including one that has deep personal meaning to the South Korean president himself: family reunification. And the date to watch for, August 15th, National Liberation Day in both countries. That's when families separated since the Korean War 60-plus years ago will reunite. Since a previous Korean summit in 2000, there have been family reunions on and off, but nothing since October 2015. And President Moon Jae-in's own parents, they fled North Korea in the 50s, and his mother's last wish is to see just one more time the sister she left behind. Their first and only reunion was almost 15 years ago. Now, you can bet Donald Trump was watching today's summit pretty closely. His meeting with Kim Jong-un could be just a few weeks away. And as Keith Bogue explains, Trump, too, has changed his tune.
Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago.
It was only a few months ago that Donald Trump was winding up his supporters by trash-talking Kim Jong-un. No longer.
Things have changed very radically from a few months ago. You know, the name-calling and a lot of other things.
In fact, this week, Trump even described Kim in righteous terms.
He really has been very open and I think very honorable from everything we're seeing.
Kim is actually still the leader that ordered his uncle and others executed reportedly by anti-aircraft guns, and allegedly had his half-brother assassinated with a nerve agent. He still rules what's arguably the world's most authoritarian state. What's changed during Trump's time in office, though, is that Kim has brought his country's nuclear weapons development to its final stages, testing long-range missiles and claiming to have a hydrogen bomb. That, in spite of Trump's threats to bring down fire and fury on North Korea if it continued its nuclear program. Kim seems to have forced his way into a stronger negotiating position.
It's never gone like this. It's never gone this far. I don't think it's ever had this enthusiasm for them wanting to make a deal.
Trump says previous presidents have been played by North Korea, and so he was asked how he could be sure he isn't being played right now.
And yeah, I agree. The United States has been played beautifully like a fiddle because you had a different kind of a leader. We're not going to be played, okay?
He seems to view the North Korea problem in unusually personal terms, as though it might be his historic great man moment.
I think I have a responsibility to see if I can do it. And if I can't do it, it'll be a very tough time for a lot of countries and a lot of people. It's certainly something that I hope I can do for the world.
And Andrew, Trump has been very clear about what success means to him in these circumstances. It means the denuclearization of North Korea, quite literally that North Korea would give up its nuclear arsenal.
But Keith, does denuclearization mean different things to different people?
Absolutely it does. And it appears to mean to the North Koreans that they would only have to freeze their nuclear program, that they could keep everything they've developed so far, but not have to give up anything that they've developed so far.
And so, I mean, if we parse what Trump has said about the consequences of failure here, is he suggesting that things could end up worse than before this whole process started?
Yeah, he's absolutely suggesting things could end up worse, but it's not clear how they would end up worse, because the conventional wisdom has always been that even though there is a lot of bellicose talk from the president, the United States is not about to initiate an aggression against North Korea, not about to risk a war that would cost perhaps millions of lives in South Korea. So the answer to the question of whether they'd use weapons or military action, probably not.
Keith Bogue in Washington, thanks.
Thank you.
Now, nearly 1,000 people who were born in North Korea live in Canada now, along with tens of thousands with connections to the South. So what's happening between those two countries hits very close to home. The CBC's Greg Rasmussen took a look.
What was it like that moment?
For those with ties to Korea, watching the latest developments is both stunning and emotional.
As I started getting, goosebumps on my arms, I was starting to tear up a bit because it's such a magnificent, significant event.
Growing up in Korea, it was hard to imagine a true reconciliation until now.
It was the images of, Kim Jong-un and President Moon, hugging and having all these sort of interactions. And this is something that you don't see every day.
Other Canadians with ties to Korea are more skeptical.
Physically seeing that handshake and seeing the North Korean leader cross the border, the DMZ, that part was weird.
Paul Bay says brutal prison camps and a regime that demands cult-like loyalty can't be overlooked.
My biggest concern, like most Koreans, are what is justice going to look like? Once we open up that border, if it happens again, you're going to go up north and it's going to be like the end of World War II in Germany. You're going to see all these horrors, and except now, peace depends on acting nice towards that leader who's extended a hand.
Those who study the country know true peace, if it comes, won't be easy.
This summit will provide him an excellent opportunity to improve his typical image as a dictator, and also an opportunity for him to make a debut into the international community as a leader of a normal country.
With more than 200,000 Canadians having ties to Korea, interest here will remain strong, watching with hope as well as skepticism. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
And Adrian, that mix of hope and skepticism is undoubtedly what makes every step of this process so critical, but also so uncertain at the same time.
Well, and it will change again and again and again, so we have to hang on here. There was, Andrew, a different sort of uncertainty here at home today, a sudden and unexplained shutdown at multiple stock exchanges which rattled investors across the country today. It happened right in the middle of trading. But what the exact issues are remain unclear. And Jacqueline Hansen joins me now. Jacqueline, what happened?
Well, Adrian, it started out just like any other Friday. Trading was relatively calm until everything stopped. At 1:39 Eastern Time, Canada's main exchange was halted. TMX Group shut down trading on all its exchanges for the rest of the day over an unspecified internal technical issue. TMX says it is working to rectify it.
It's alarming to start with. It's unusual.
The shutdown likely caused traders who were trying to buy or sell stocks to miss opportunities.
It would definitely have cost people money, and I'm quite certain that over the weekend that they will be, let's say, a little jumpy over the weekend, unsettled.
Today's shutdown is unusual, but it's not the first. In 2008, the TSX closed for almost an entire day because of issues with data feeds. If today's problem is short-term, like a power failure or some sort of technical glitch, the financial world may forgive and forget.
Until they actually tell us what the issue is, I'm not letting them off the hook.
TMX says it was not a hack. Still, for one of the 10 largest stock exchanges in the world, reputation matters.
We need a market that is solid, that the numbers represent true trading and not something else. So until we know what the issue is, we won't know what the reputational damage has done to the Toronto Stock Exchange.
TMX says that all trading will be back up and running Monday morning. Still, investors will be waiting for answers as to what could cause such a massive and sudden stop.
And Jacqueline, what sort of investors are we talking about here? Who exactly would have paid a bit of a price today?
Yeah, these are the investors that are watching minute by minute, second by second, the sort of day traders that we refer to, not so much your average long-term investors. This may be a blip that they never really even notice if it indeed is just that, a blip.
Okay, still waiting for answers. Jacqueline Hansen, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Here's what else we're working on tonight on The National. You'll meet the Ontario actress who refuses to let it go because she's starring as Queen Elsa on Broadway, of course.
And Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland continues to be the target of Russia's scorn. Could that grudge put next year's election at risk from meddling from Moscow?
And he's been killing since the 70s, but home DNA testing led police to the notorious Golden State Killer in just a few months.
Once we got the initial DNA match results and found very distant relatives, it took us 4 months.
Joseph James DeAngelo appeared for the first time as a defendant in a California courtroom today. The 72-year-old former police officer is accused of being the Golden State Killer, responsible for 13 murders and dozens of sexual assaults in the 1970s and 80s. Those crimes were unspeakably violent, so DNA was left behind. But as Kim Brunhuber explains, the match investigators were looking for had to wait for a more modern database to emerge.
Cracking a case that had gone cold for more than 40 years was always going to take something new, something special. Over the last decade or so, millions of Canadians and Americans have mailed in samples of their saliva to companies which analyze their DNA and help them trace their family tree. Few users ever suspected their spittle could be used to find criminals.
This was an amazing retirement gift for me.
Investigator Paul Holes spent more than 2 decades trying to track down the so-called Golden State Killer. Then, late last year, a masterstroke. He tapped into an online open-source database called GEDmatch, where people can share their DNA results. Authorities created a fake profile, but the DNA they uploaded to the site was from a sample recovered from a 1980 murder.
GEDmatch then is able to search that profile against the other public profiles that individuals have placed in there and produce literally a simple table that indicates how much DNA that person shares with the profile that I uploaded, and then gives the username and the email address of the person that is matching.
The sample matched several distant relatives of the suspect, but authorities needed a sample from the suspect himself, 72-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo, who was unlikely to simply hand over a swab of his DNA. So they got it on their own.
They did a surveillance and they waited for him to discard something into the public domain. Once they did that, they could then take that item, whether it was a cigarette butt or a beer can that he drank from or whatever, take it back to the lab and try to generate a profile from that.
They got a match and arrested DeAngelo.
I believe very strongly that it's the greatest tool ever given to law enforcement.
But for American users of these DNA kits, the thought of police sifting through their genes is potentially discomforting. Most sites don't divulge customers' data to police unless they have a court order, but they admit there is no guarantee of privacy. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Los Angeles.
So to be clear, as Kim said, the website where police found the match is open source. So that means that people had voluntarily and publicly shared their DNA profiles. That isn't the case with kit testing companies like 23andMe. Now, GEDmatch says it had no idea police were using its open source website this way. In a statement, the company says, while the database was created for genealogical research, it's important that GEDmatch participants understand the possible uses of their DNA, including identification of relatives who have committed crimes or were victims of crimes. It went on to say if you're worried about the use of your information, don't upload it or delete your account.
Still ahead on The National, from the Hammer to the Great White Way. We'll take you backstage to meet the Hamiltonian playing Queen Elsa on Broadway.
Elsa
Her power doesn't come from anger, it comes from fear. These women save each other. They're each other's heroine.
Don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be.
Tonight on The National, more fallout in the wake of Bill Cosby's guilty verdict. His alma mater, Temple University, said today it is rescinding his honorary degree. It comes a day after his conviction on 3 counts of sexual assault against a former Temple employee, Andrea Constant. Cosby's now under house arrest while he awaits sentencing. In Quebec City today, a young mother was charged with second-degree murder for the death of her toddler. The 2-year-old girl's body was found last week in a garbage bin, stabbed to death, according to police. On top of the murder charge, the mother's also been charged with committing an indignity to a body. And a third-party investigator has cleared a veteran journalist at Ontario's public broadcaster of sexual harassment allegations. Steve Paikin, host of TVO's The Agenda, was accused earlier this year by a former Toronto mayoral candidate, Sarah Thompson. She said he made a sexual advance towards her in 2010, but a report released today said her account was not supported by evidence.
Those watching the rising tensions between Russia and the West just got more fodder for all that talk of a new Cold War.
Russia threatens allies and partners, both militarily and through an aggressive campaign to undermine Western democratic institutions.
That is newly minted U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking to NATO today, echoing the sentiment from the G7 Foreign Ministers Summit earlier this week.
The abhorrent behavior that we've witnessed, particularly recently, by Russia.
Sowing doubt and confusion and spreading all this fake news.
This continued flaunting of international norms and standards.
So as you hear there, the concern is consistent about Russia's apparent campaign of so-called hybrid attacks, coming sometimes in a military form, like the 2014 seizure of Crimea by forces without insignias. Sometimes cyber, say hacking emails and voter databases in the 2016 U.S. election. Sometimes it comes in the form of information, using state media and social media to spread propaganda, provocation, and outright fake news. Well, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister was especially forceful at the G7 meeting, and Moscow appears to be fighting back with a direct attack on Chrystia Freeland herself. As Katie Simpson explains, it's a sign to some that Canada also risks being targeted by the same tools Russia has used to distort, divide, and even conquer.
Russian state television called Chrystia Freeland a liar. It highlighted her grandfather's connection to a Nazi newspaper and criticized the meeting of G7 foreign ministers in Toronto this week. Sergei Lavrov said those meetings hosted by Freeland were anti-Russian after ministers promised to find new ways to call out Russian aggression.
We all share deep concerns about what we agree is a wide pattern of unacceptable behavior.
Freeland likely irked Moscow further by inviting her Ukrainian counterpart to a working brunch at her home, even though Ukraine is not in the G7. Freeland's office won't comment, but the opposition is coming to her defense.
We certainly stand by the minister not having her good name sullied by these Russian efforts. And I think the more we call it out, the more anything coming out of Russia will not be taken seriously.
This is not the first time Freeland has been targeted by the Russians. She was one of 13 parliamentarians banned from traveling to the country in 2014 in response to Canadian sanctions. And last year, pro-Russian news outlets published similar stories about her grandfather's past. At the time, she compared that situation to Russian efforts to interfere with the U.S. election.
I think that Canadians and indeed other Western countries should be prepared for similar efforts to be directed at us.
There's a lot of similarities, and I think it does raise some concerns.
The Kremlin may be looking for a vocal minority in Canada to amplify its anti-Freeland message, according to this professor.
That's how they create social division. That's how they sow doubt. And so that's where I think we see the similarities with the U.S. election.
Russia denies any wrongdoing and claims it did not interfere in the U.S. election.
But the federal government is working with Canadian political parties to try to prevent any foreign interference ahead of the 2019 vote here. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
So far, a lot of what officials are doing to defend against foreign propaganda and fake news is happening behind closed doors. But in the UK, the issue is very public. It's been making news daily. And Nala Ayed spoke with some of the headliners.
On days he hears from witnesses, British MP Damian Collins is on the offensive, armed only with details and hard questions.
The purpose of this inquiry is really to understand how we keep democracy safe in a world of fake news and disinformation. There's about 80 million fake accounts on Facebook.
For the parliamentary committee he forcefully chairs, it had been a quiet quest for months until the Facebook scandal broke.
To target Facebook users.
Then the world caught up to Collins, grilling witnesses like this Facebook official on live streams worldwide.
We've been concerned about Russian activity in UK elections, in the referendum and other elections here.
Lost in the Facebook spectacle, the many questions about Russia and its role on this side of the Atlantic in undermining democracy. And it's with that hat on that Collins is now part of a newly formed super committee on Russia.
So look at military interference, communications interference, cyber attacks, to say, okay, we may look at these in different silos, but from a Russian perspective, there is a common strategy. So we need to have an integrated approach here to understanding that strategy and how it works, and then how we can respond to that.
That it is highly likely that Russia was responsible for the acts.
Since that nerve agent attack in Salisbury, Russia in the UK has been top of mind. Diplomats turfed, and now the pro-Kremlin RT network, the subject of 7 investigations. But the concerns are long-standing.
So that's why we need you to disconnect now.
At the government's latest cybersecurity conference, a simulation of a cyber attack. There were 49 blamed on Russia in the last 6 months alone. So in these corridors, Russia looms large.
Russia is our most capable state adversary in cyberspace.
And part of their focus is fending off Russian interference in democracy.
Media freedoms, public debate, democratic processes, but we can confidently say that we have not detected a successful attempt against the UK electoral process as part of that at this stage.
After 14 months of exhaustive hearings, Collins is convinced Russia tried to influence the Brexit vote.
We know that the Russians have bot accounts running on Twitter. We know at a very low level there was activity on Facebook. So we know the intent was there.
But could it have swayed the outcome in the Brexit referendum?
It doesn't mean to say it was necessarily influential in swinging the whole result, or even if you ran the referendum, you get a different result. I have to go. Sorry, thank you.
With that, he's called away to a vote. Collins plans to report by summer. Nala Ayed, CBC News, London.
Next on The National, a new frontier in farming. Tending the land means covering lots of ground, maybe too much. One possible solution, send in the drones.
It can take me an hour and a half to check cattle, right? If I'm sitting at the gate with the drone, it can be done in 15 minutes. Time is money for us.
The Hunter Brothers opening tonight's tribute concert for the Humboldt Broncos. And they're just one of several Canadian country music groups lined up to perform at the SaskTel Centre in Saskatoon. All proceeds from ticket sales will go to the victims' families, and organizers say they hope it will raise spirits as well as funds. Also tonight, we're keeping an eye on the situation in New Brunswick. Floodwaters there are rising, and residents have been warned to stay alert. In Fredericton, the situation is especially bad along the St. John River. Nearby neighborhoods are underwater, and officials say it's not over yet. They're expecting more flooding in the days to come.
Over here.
And the news royal watchers have been waiting for. The new prince has a name. He is Louis Arthur Charles. It was somewhat of a surprise choice. There was more money in betting circles on the royal couple choosing Arthur or Albert. But Louis is certainly a name that runs in the family. Both William and the new prince's older brother, George, have Louis as a middle name. Well, a growing number of farmers are looking up to give themselves an advantage. They're launching drones to give them eyes in the sky. And turns out they might be able to do a lot more than that. Carolyn Dunn went to drone school to find out more.
Don't mistake Justin Moser for a backyard drone enthusiast. He's got his eye firmly on how drones can make his family farm more efficient.
Sure, it's fun flying a drone, but I want it for its practical purposes, not just to go fly around on Saturday afternoon, right? So.
Right. This is business.
This is more, business to me than a hobby.
So then the next app that you're going to open.
Welcome to Drone School, a popular course among farmers these days. They're learning to map their fields with a drone and a tablet loaded with specialty software. And of course, how to fly a drone, which it turns out is more difficult for some than others.
It says ready.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm ready.
But once mastered, the drone advantage is obvious. The big picture view from above can show you things just not visible from the ground.
And it'll tell you whether you have healthy crop, unhealthy crop, stressed crop, whether it's trampled, whether there's been some damage from frost or hail.
For Wayne Kurkowski, that means pinpointing issues on his 600-hectare mixed farm and treating just the problem areas with herbicides or pesticides. That not only saves money, it's easier on the environment.
If we use too many interventions or inputs, they end up somewhere. And so they're going to end up in groundwater, they're going to end up in runoff water, they're going to end up in our food.
It's not just the crops. Drones are being used to check on the health and location of livestock. Steve Upham is the reeve of St. Paul County and a cattle rancher too.
Getting into my lease, it can take me an hour and a half to check cattle, right? If I'm sitting at the gate with the drone, it can be done in 15 minutes. Right. Time is money for us.
One of the limitations on a large farm is a regulation that requires the operator to have the drone always in their line of sight. That's under review. Marcus Weber expects regulations like that will evolve as the technology does. He says the next generation of drones and sensors will be able to measure very specific crop health.
It'll tell you exactly what the problems are, what the nutrient levels are, what type of pest might be attacking it.
As the technology advances, the demand for these drones on the farm is increasing. Of course, these eyes in the sky have a price. A full kit can cost anywhere from about $2,500 all the way up to more than $20,000. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, near St. Paul, Alberta.
That's some good drone control. And looking beyond the farm, there are lots of novel uses of drones gaining traction. The United Nations is currently using Romeo drones to battle diseases like malaria and Zika in Brazil. What are Romeo drones? Romeo is short for Remotely Operated Mosquito Emission Operation. Scientists use radiation to sterilize lab-bred male mosquitoes, and then they're released using drones, causing local insects to decline and stopping the spread of disease.
Still ahead on The National, you'll meet a Canadian whose talent has taken her from Hamilton all the way to Broadway as part of the pop culture phenomenon Disney's Frozen.
There's something about the magic of being in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and getting up in front of them and telling some story and watching them be changed by it.
Our Stephen D'Souza speaks with Casey Levy about the rewards and challenges of bringing this instant animated classic to life and what it takes to bring crowds to their feet 8 times a week. But first, one of the most popular pop bands in history is making a surprise comeback. The unmistakable sound of Abba, irresistible hooks, and those vocals. The band was a global force in the 70s, but their careers faltered by the 80s after both couples in the group had divorced. After 35 years, fans were resigned to never hearing another new ABBA song until today. The 4 members announced they've recorded 2 brand new songs. It happened last year in conjunction with an Avatar project designed to emulate live concerts. We all 4 felt that after some 35 years, it could be fun to join forces again and go into the recording studio. So we did. An extremely joyful experience.
Mamma mia, here I go again.
Rock critics used to dismiss their music. Now they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And their musical Mamma Mia has reportedly grossed on stage and screen more than $2.5 billion.
Time has been most cruel to you, sir.
A movie sequel is out in July, but you'll have to wait a bit longer for one of the new songs. I Still Have Faith in You will be featured on a TV special in December. A longtime friend of the band says it's less like their early pop and more like their melancholy later work. Either way, there are a lot of fans likely to be thrilled.
For the first time in forever, there'll be music, there'll be light.
Just one of the hugely popular songs from Disney's 2013 smash hit Frozen. And now the live-action Frozen musical is packing them in on Broadway.
It's finally come to knock down my door. I can't hide this time like I hid before.
That's Hamilton, Ontario's Casey Levy, who stars as Queen Elsa, performing Monster, a brand new song created just for the Broadway version. And she's getting rave reviews for her performance, but for all of that success, she takes nothing for granted. Broadway is as demanding as it is rewarding. Stephen D'Souza caught up with her in New York to talk about the role of a lifetime.
Snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen.
It's the highest-grossing Disney animated film ever, with 2 iconic princesses and the song. The one that's etched into the brain of every parent with a small child.
Let it go, can't hold it back anymore.
Bringing Frozen to life on Broadway and transporting Elsa from screen to stage is the challenge Canadian Casey Levy faces 8 shows a week. No pressure, right?
I thought, oh God, can I do this? Can I be this person that everybody wants me to be?
Don't let them see, be the good girl you always have to be.
So how does she do it? She takes her cue from the song's title.
Ultimately, what gets me through every day is not thinking about it, like actively not thinking about it.
So in a sense, when you're singing the song, you let it go.
I do, yeah.
Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know.
Casey has a voice from God. She really does.
Not only has she made the role and the song her own, Levy has wowed critics and her co-stars.
There must be Canadian water. When she grew up, she drank something that made that voice golden, lush, powerful. She's a powerhouse.
Levy grew up in Hamilton. Her success comes as no surprise to Gary Smith. The theater critic cast her for a role with the Hamilton Players Guild when she was 17. Smith has since followed her career around the world and recently took in Frozen.
I stood up at the end and I cried, and I couldn't stop crying because I was so proud of her, and I was so thrilled that what she wanted for herself happened to her.
She didn't get the part after her first audition. She was chosen after a new director was brought in. Helping her was the bond she developed with her onstage sister Anna, played by Patty Murin. The two formed a lasting connection moments before their first read together. It happened as they were chatting casually, trying to ease the stress, and they discovered they were connected by personal tragedy.
She just sort of said, yeah, I'm good, I just had a miscarriage. And she just sort of said it. And I just said, I've had a miscarriage. I know what that is. And we just sort of like looked at each other and didn't say anything, and then we just held each other's hands. It was hard for both of us, and as it is for every woman and family that deals with this. And so for us to be able to just talk about it and say it was like, oh, we both just sort of breathed. And
Levy now has a 2-year-old son. Her performance is generating Tony buzz, and the tomboy from Hamilton is now a Disney princess, living her dream on Broadway.
There's something about the magic of being in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and getting up in front of them and telling some story and watching them be changed by it.
Don't let them in, don't let
The role of a lifetime that she shows no signs of letting go.
conceal, don't feel, don't let them know.
Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
Well, now they know.
And Frozen has done very well at the box office so far, shattering sales records at the St. James Theatre earlier this month when it grossed almost $5 million in just 2 weeks. And there is buzz that Casey Levy will get a Tony nomination for Best Actress in a Musical when they're announced on Tuesday, though Frozen was largely snubbed by Broadway's other big awards ceremony, the Drama Desk Awards.
Now, the Stratford Perth Museum welcomed a surprise visitor today. Justin Bieber showed up at the exhibit that is dedicated to Justin Bieber. The museum's general manager, John Kastner, tells us how it all happened, and that is our moment of the day.
Well, we didn't get a lot of notice that he was coming today. We had a bit of an inkling. We had a text from his grandmother, and she said that we're just out for breakfast and we're going to come over in a bit, which was unusual. When he came in, to be honest, he couldn't have been nicer. He was grateful. He was appreciative. He hugged the two people who essentially created the exhibit. He walked through the exhibit with his grandparents and some staff, posed for lots of photos, signed a couple of T-shirts for us. He seemed genuinely appreciative and must have said thank you half a dozen times.
Now, not that I have any interest in going, but I'll say that if I had been there at that moment, I'm not sure I actually would have even recognized Justin Bieber, because that's not the mental image of him that I have in my head, but there you go.
No, here's the other part, though, Andrew. If you were a fan of his, you would have recognized him if he had walked in, even looking like that.
Okay, so it gets odder, because take a listen to what we learned when we called the Justin Bieber Museum today. Have a listen to this.
Hi, it's Peter Mansbridge. You've reached the Stratford Perth Museum. We are located at 4275 Huron Road, just west of Stratford. We are open 10 to 4 Monday to Saturday and noon to 4 on Sundays.
Okay, so how does that happen? John Kastner says apparently that last year he ran into Peter in the parking lot of the Canadian Tire, as you do, and he just said, hey, how do you feel about recording our phone message? And Peter, being the good sport he is, said, okay. So there you go. Peter's been very busy the last year. He is actually in the process of working on a documentary on the royals for the run-up to the royal wedding. But apparently, anytime you want to hear those dulcet tones, just call the Justin Bieber Museum.
Well, it's nice to know if this doesn't work out, there are options for news anchors, right?
You had me at Peter and Canadian Tire. What was he doing there? Getting a sleeping bag or a
That's a whole other moment, right?
hockey stick, or just, I don't know, maybe needed new tires. Anyway, glad to see that there's life after the National. The Spring Hill Center in